Hello again, everyone. Edwin Learnard back once again. In this YouTube segment, I'm going to be dissertating and talking about, as we could say, somewhat of a morose or morbid subject called death, and really coping with death in this particular segment. Well, first let me talk about, my experiences with death. 1974, my father died of Hodgkin's disease. He had internal bleeding, and as many of you know, it is an insidious, illness. It is a cancer. At that time, they didn't have radiation or chemotherapy available for it, as you know now they do. Believe renowned hockey great Mario Lemieux had this, and he had it. I don't know if he's still getting treatment or if he had it and doesn't have it anymore. But I know that there were treatments available for him. It's a shame they didn't have that at the time. Now. At that time, I wasn't even 4 years old, so I don't really have much recollection of my father. But at the same time, there was still an ordeal to be dealt with, because it was a time in my life, all my life, that I grew up essentially without having a father. And, that was a little bit tough, because my mother never decided to remarry or anything, or get, that significant other or father figure for me. And, it was kind of difficult. I got ridiculed in school and stuff because I had no father. Somebody said nice father, and they thought, it was a big joke or something. Yeah, kids can be cruel, and they can ridicule and mock you over the dumbest things, and that's what happened with me from time to time. Anyway, let me go to the next person. In 1988, my great-grandfather died, and eerily enough, we had some kind of argument at one time. I don't know if it was like maybe a year or two before he called me. And one day he called me, and basically it was to reconcile. I don't remember exactly what he said 100%, but at that time he said, I think it was his own way of saying he was sorry and he didn't want any hard feelings or animosity connected, with us anymore. And eerily enough, the next day he died. I had to identify the body. It was not the best experience for me, and it was very saddening and devastating, to say the least. Now, after that, in 1993, my grandfather died practically in front of my eyes. Not literally, but I had been asleep. I was staying in at my grandparents' house at the time, my room, and I heard some kind of commotion, and it sounded like people talking on some walkie-talkies or something. It sounded like some paramedics were there, and I feared the worst. And sure enough, he had I believe it was a heart attack. And shortly afterwards, my grandma had come home and told me that it was confirmed and official that he had died. And it was very, it was a saddening experience, and just like with my great-grandfather, it was a devastating thing, because my grandfather, God rest his soul, he was more, he was someone that, I kind of looked at like a simulated father role, and it was just, terrible loss. And but I dealt with it, and I moved, of course, at some point moved forward. Then in 2011, my grandmother died. And, she, maybe in certain ways was more of a mother to me than my actual mother was. And, it was very, this was something out of all the the family members that died, possibly I took that the worst, because I felt very close to her. Even though we hadn't seen each other in a number of years, we had certain detachment. So maybe that was why I didn't react as strongly as maybe I would have if, I had actually had consistent communication with her in the last few years or what have you. But it was still a strong loss. And, it was something where, I knew that, her and my, grandfather were like saints, and they really, were very benevolent, kind people to me, and did a lot for me. And I stayed, with them a number of years, and there were some number of months where I didn't even, pay them anything, and as far as staying there, and they were very, liberal and, and nice about it, where, maybe at least compared to the average person. Now, what I want to talk about is, okay, those are as far as my personal experiences with death. Now, what I want to talk about is basically, coping with it, and, I think what's important, to remember is that, everybody, if somebody dies, somebody prominent in his or her life, everybody has a different response time. I don't consider myself a real cold or callous person, but I have one way I handle death, and it's like, I know I go through, grieving, mourning period, and then it's like you move forward, and, the way I can, I justify this because, for one thing, the family member wouldn't want you to grieve forever and ever, and have those thoughts, just dominate you so much and become all-encompassing that you don't go on with your life. Now, I mean, don't get me wrong, we all might periodically think about people that die from time to time, even long years after that person is gone, and we even have reminders when we're paying tribute or homage to these people. But, it's about, progression, proceeding forward, and try not to live in the past. Another thing that is important, I believe, is that, don't lament or ruminate over all the negatives that occurred or transpired with you and these family members, because that's just going to eat away at your soul, and, it's going to cause much exasperation and more inner tension and turmoil and problems. You don't need to do that, because, it doesn't change anything. That's why it's important to have the best relationship possible with the family members when these people are alive, so you don't have these things go on later on and circling your mind. Well, why didn't I do this? Why could have this been better? I wish I could have restored this, because it's impossible to do. And that's the thing. As far as coping with or handling something prior to the person's gone, because it's kind of like life, death, interviews have one thing in common, and you don't get a second chance to make a first impression, obviously, and that's one fundamental thing to always remember as far as this goes. I mean, like I said, everybody's reaction time is different. I had somebody that was a good friend that I worked with for some time, and he tragically, he had lost his daughter due to some violent act, directed at her. And even though he never acknowledged it to me, I think, the reason he kind of dissipated into thin air and moved out, I think possibly out of state or out of the city at least, was attributed to this person's dying. I asked him, confront him somewhat and said, were you just trying to get away from the memory of what had happened? And he was like, well, no. I believe him to be a more sentimental person than me, but this was, his own biological, it was a daughter, and, there's, a lot of people that believe when they have, like, somebody, like a daughter or son dies, that's, the strongest, relationship. That's very subjective. Everybody has their own thoughts on that, and possibly, he felt so close to her that maybe it was just hard for him to stay in that neighborhood where the incident occurred. I mean, that's just me speculating and theorizing, but everybody deals with death situations obviously in a different way. And with me, maybe the one good thing about me not having an overabundance or surfeit of family members is the fact that I don't have to really be concerned with too many losses taking place. I mean, I know that's very exceptional silver lining in what I'm talking about, but it's it's just it's the reality of the situation. I don't have a significant other. I don't have any children, biological or otherwise. So, I guess that's one good thing about being, solitude being about my best friend right now, is because I don't have to be concerned with that or be consumed with something. If something, perilous was to occur or transpire with, somebody close to me. I might have a few close friends, but even those people, the communication is very sporadic. So, I mean, there's not really anyone I necessarily see as even a simulated family member at this point in time. So, the thing too is that, like I stated before, let's always try to be, have the best relationship possible with family members, reconcile when necessary. Don't ruminate, don't lament, don't be vindictive and grudge holding. It just, like I said, it causes turmoil and tension. A lot of times a person that's holding the grudge actually suffers more than the person that committed, the iniquitous act toward them, because the grudge that the person's holding is connected a lot of times with so much animosity and so much anger, and that it just eats away at the person. While the person that committed, the erroneous act, or whatever you want to call it, basically is just like, sometimes like whatever, and apathetic. It's sometimes it's important maybe be the better person, and then reconcile with that person that did that did you wrong. Well, one last thing I wanted to get at is that I said to myself one day, I don't really always have an overabundance of positive things to say about myself, but I will say one thing about me. A number of you people know that are watching this video know that I'm, somewhat of a sports fanatic. I'm very enamored with sports. So I couldn't help but make kind of like an analogy or metaphor with this. I thought to myself one day, I said, Eddie, the way, if there was a draft for people that cope with adversity and death, and on the way they handle it, you'd be a first-round draft choice. And I had done something I hadn't done in a while. I smiled. Well, people, thanks for listening to my video and watching it. And until my next video, people, stay well.